Welcome to the seventh and the last video in the Agile Product Journey series of videos. In this video, we will look at how to create a high-level release plan, and with that, you will be able to determine how much time would you take to, say, for example, uh, or let me say, how much time tentatively would you take to complete your release 2, or how much uh, how much backlog would you be able to convert into product by next 6 months. So to come to a release plan of that sort, um, we will need two things mainly. One is a estimated scope that we already have from our previous video, and the second one is velocity. Now there are multiple ways of calculating the initial velocity, but one thing that you have to remember in all those ways is that this is only a guess. This could be your best guess, but it is not the exact number. So if you've guessed something, you've derived something, and if you are not able to meet it, there's no big deal about it. Okay, so if your teams have worked together already, then take their historical velocity and use it as your initial velocity. Now, if it is a new team, there are a couple of ways you can go about it to find your initial velocity. So one of the way is to get your team together, hide the estimates of the backlog, and put the backlog in front of them and ask them how much will they be able to do in iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3, and iteration 4, and also tell them the size of the iteration. So something like what you can see here. And after they have guessed which user stories they will be able to do in these iterations, calculate the estimates of the user stories. Now, if the numbers that have come in, I mean the total of the iterations, if they are nearby or around each other, you could simply take an average. If there is a huge variation in these numbers, probably go for a repeat exercise. But what you want to do is, and you can see that in this diagram, that once you have the estimates added, take an average and use this as your initial velocity. The other way that you could use to find an initial velocity is calculate the capacity of your team in number of hours. So for example, if you have a team of 8 people and your iteration is 2 weeks, that is 10 days, and we will take 6 hours of a productive workday. So we get 6 into 8 into 10, 240 hours of capacity for my iteration. Now get your team to look at the backlog, hide the estimates again, ask them what do you think you will be able to achieve in the iteration. Now, once they pull in the stories, ask them what is the time that they think that will need tentatively for coding, testing, uh, deployment, automation, and such activities, and check those number of hours against 240 hours, which is our capacity. If their guess, if the total of what they have guessed is more than 240, ask them to drop some. If they have guessed somewhere around 240, then add the story estimates that they have selected. The total of those story estimates could be your initial velocity. And just in case if they have the hours adding up to what they have chosen for iteration is way too less, or if it's for example below 220 or below 210, ask them to try and pick one or two more stories. So in this way, you can get an initial velocity from this alternate approach, and there could be multiple as well, which I'm sure either your project would or you would find it somewhere else. So now that you have an initial velocity, one recommendation to go for is try and calculate a best case velocity and a worst case velocity. And the worst case velocity can be a 70%, 80%, 50%, depending on how complex and uncertain you think your product is or your project is. So now you have scope and you have velocity. So to come up with a release plan, if you were to um, answer questions like how much time would it take to deliver up to release 2 of your story map or product backlog, add all the story points for the stories till release 2 and divide the sum by the initial velocity. That will give you the time that would be needed, or the number of iterations that would be needed to to deliver your release 2. Also do this exercise with your worst case velocity so that you have an average. Say for example, uh, we will be able to complete release 2 by 3 or 4 months. Similarly, if you were to answer questions like uh, how much will you be able to deliver in the next 6 months, then calculate the number of iterations in the next 6 months, take initial velocity and multiply it with the number of iterations. So in this case, you will probably be able to come up with an answer, something similar to like we'll be able to complete our first MVP, release 1, and maybe some part of release 2. Again, do this with worst case velocity as well. And um, again, you will be able to answer in terms of uh, that we will be able to complete MVP release 1 and 50 to 70% of release 2. So that's how you can do release planning at a very high level. Thank you.